So hello everyone, welcome to the first webinar of the new season around recruitment from both perspectives. I'm Evie Guinea, Business Development and Project Manager within the LPA, and among other activities, I'm leading activities around education and talent attraction. For those who doesn't know the LPA, we exist 12 years and we have more than 380 members so far, most of them corporate members. One of our main goals is to, of course, promote Luxembourg abroad and increase awareness for the sector by organizing international roadshows, webinars, and events in Luxembourg. On our YouTube channel, you can find any kind of content related to our sector, technical and of course not technical. So as I mentioned before, we focus also on talent attraction. So for those who are thinking of moving in Luxembourg for a new opportunity or for an internship, it's good to know that we have a job fair taking place 2 times per year. And the next edition will be on October 25th. So for more information and registrations, you need to visit our website. So without further ado, we have with us Zils and Laurie from Allen & Overy, Clement from EY, Darren from Anderson Wise, and Joshua from GB Bullhound, discussing about recruitment, drivers and struggles when you decide to move in Luxembourg, benefits, immigration processes, and much more. Before I pass over to Zils, I would like to remind you that we have a Q&A function that you can submit your questions during the webinar. So welcome all. Zils, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Avi. So I'm absolutely delighted to be leading this webinar and this panel discussion with the 4 great guests that we have. Avi, you already introduced them quickly. I would like to do that with a bit further detail. So ladies first, we have Laurie Luxami, who's an associate in the employment law team of Allen & Overy. She will in particular speak about immigration questions. We have Joshua Warren, who's a vice president and global talent and acquisition leader at GP Bullhound. For those who do not know, that company is a technology advisory and investment firm. Then we have Clément Reuter from Ernst & Young. He's a recruitment manager. And we have Darren Robinson, who's the founder and managing partner of the recruitment firm Anderson Wise. So welcome everybody. We are, as Avi has mentioned, speaking today about employing and being employed in Luxembourg with a particular focus on the private capital sector. And you may ask the question, why have you chosen that topic? And there are essentially 2 reasons for it. The first one is the private capital sector is super hot in Luxembourg at the moment. We have, when you are just looking at the asset class of private equity, we have a growth of over 10% per year, year on. We have 18 out of 20 top PE fundraisers worldwide that have structures in Luxembourg or that have funds that are domiciled in Luxembourg. So super important sector. And then we have, of course, a landscape which has the reputation of attracting skilled people, international people, also good social security system, but still sometimes for people from further away, it is difficult to understand how Luxembourg works, what the financial, economic, social drivers of Luxembourg are. And the goal of our session today is to tell you our experiences, what we think works well, what doesn't work so well, where Luxembourg is attractive, where it's not so attractive, where the private capital sector is attractive and where it may not be so much. And that is the purpose of our discussion that we will have over the next 45 minutes roughly, and then we will have a 15 minutes Q&A session. So the questions that you are raising through the Q&A tool will be collected and will be addressed then at the end of the session. The structure that we propose is to have a quick introduction and then focus first on recruitment, both from an employer's and an employee's perspective, then move on to the international dimension of the topic. So immigration, how is Luxembourg attractive? Where is it not so much attractive? What are the struggles of people that move to Luxembourg? And then the last chunk of topics would be benefits. What do private capital players offer to employees generally, and what do they not offer when we look at the market trends? To kick off the session, I suggest that we first speak to Joshua, because Joshua, my understanding is that your company and yourself, by the way, in the lead, you have moved a number of people to Luxembourg very recently, so you may have firsthand experience on what it's like.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, hi everyone. And very true. So it's still very fresh for me personally and as a firm to be in Luxembourg. So we've been in Luxembourg now for just over a year, and the office was formally and officially open from November last year. So we've seen some tremendous growth since then. I feel we have started with one person and now we're at 6 people, and we're still growing. So I'll come on to the types of profiles we recruit for, and just to expand on who we are for those who don't know us. So we are a leading technology advisory firm. That's been our primary business for kind of over 18, 19 years. But in recent years, we've really developed our investment business, and hence why Luxembourg is such a key geography and a place to be. And in order to really execute our strategy as a business, both globally and in Europe, it's key to have a presence in Luxembourg. So it's been of strategic importance to make sure that we fully set up the way we need to. So as a business in Luxembourg, we've hired a number of people over the last few months, and they range from compliance, operations, and even portfolio management as well. So we're very, yeah, I'd say open to which type of profiles we're looking for, but they tend to be in those buckets and range from junior entry level right the way through to senior level. And I only see that really growing over the years to come. So I would say from our experience with Luxembourg so far, there's been lots of pros. It's been very exciting. I would say the workforce is highly talented, very multicultural from what I see, highly educated, languages spoken, and I think there's lots of unique aspects to that, which make it such a great place to have a base and have a business and key people supporting what we want to do with the asset management business. On the flip side of that, from what we've seen, it's very candidate driven at the moment. That may change going into next year, but it's been very competitive to secure the right talent, which we'll talk about later on in the webinar. Multiple offers, salaries are high due to the demand for these people, this talent. So it's definitely it's been an eye-opener in terms of what we have to do to stand out, our brand, our PR, how the recruitment process should look. So we've had to adapt, I think is the key word, over the last year or so to be able to do that. So yeah, very interesting experience, but lots of positives to that so far with our Luxembourg journey.
Thank you, Joshua. Super interesting, and I think that's a nice transition to the first chunk of aspects that we would like to discuss about, namely the recruitment process. So you mentioned it's a candidate-driven context. Is that true for all roles, or are there particular roles where this is stronger than for other roles?
Yeah, so from my side, I think we've seen compliance, operations, anything where it's a regulatory position where it's accountable to the CSF. We see, yeah, the demand is high, and we have to stand out, whether that's through our compensation, our benefits, our culture, how we really sell what we're trying to achieve. So absolutely, it's definitely been in those two buckets, I would say, where we've had some struggles, but luckily we've come through and hired some great people.
So when speaking about recruitment and of course the ways to get there, maybe Clément and Darren, what kind of methods do you see on the market? Direct applications, going through agencies, other measures. Evie spoke about the job fair that the LPEA will be organizing. Evie, please correct me if I'm wrong. It's on the 25th of October, right?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Darren, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know if, hello to everybody. And thanks for that, Josh, nicely into the rest of the segment. I think if those of you are following me on social media, you might have recently saw one of my posts, which was highlighted the fact that if you're only using advertisements these days to attract talent, then yeah, good luck with that, because you know, you need more than just advertisements these days. The idea of, you know, the branding and the reputation, the referrals. I know that you know, the Big Four use their alumni incredibly well. I think that you know, referrals are the key, and also, you know, I suppose those roles are in demand. Josh, you mentioned the things that people come to me for, of course, to a recruitment firm, are those with a relationship, an established relationship with the regulator or experience with the regulator. And for these profiles, you know, they need a direct approach because they're, you know, usually already in a role, and I need to you know, encourage them to apply to other opportunities. So there's a lot more to it than just responding to advertisements. Clément, I think you'd second that.
Yeah, indeed. So basically two things here. We were speaking first about candidate-oriented markets, so that's completely true. I don't think that any of the candidates I had this year did not have at least one other process ongoing, or even some of them have offers before they even apply to your company. So like reactivity is key here, the way we approach the process as well. That being said, we still have jobs on the market that are not candidate-driven. So Luxembourg is a back and middle office, let's say, hub, I would say. So you have some jobs on which you would have very few of them, and then you would have many candidates. I would see, for example, jobs around strategy, around transactions as being very attractive for candidates, while there are very few possibilities to be hired here. Not to come back on the, let's say, the ways to attract the candidates. Actually, we've been struggling even with some junior hires. I think we discussed that already in the event this year. And I believe that there's a real shift. Maybe it was caused by COVID. It's a bit difficult to say what caused this, but there's a real shift in the approach we should have. We do still receive applications thanks to the name that we have, which is quite known. But despite that, we cannot only rely on ads. And if we rely only on ads, not only do we not reach the targets that we have in terms of recruitment, but also we don't have a choice in terms of the candidates we would select, which means from an employer perspective, you're not in a good situation, basically. So we need to go to people, and we're still trying to figure out the right approach here. I've been discussing with the network for this, and we try to have a bit more of a personalized approach. Still participate to job fairs to be visible in general, but also having having a bit of a more one-to-one approach, or at least having some small groups coming to the office or going to them to present a course or to do an intervention, maximum 20 to 60 persons. And this way you get to have more results and to get more basically CVs of candidates that would be interested. I believe that's also particularly important in terms of visibility for Luxembourg. And for the senior population, I have to mention also the added value of agencies. I believe for some specific profiles, it can be very, very useful. And there's clearly an added value for the agency to convince the person to join the company. So not always a great reputation for some agencies, but I still believe that they have a great added value on the market for sure.
Thank you, Clément. So when I hear all of you, we have a candidate-driven market. We have many offers that are going out to candidates. We have even a personalized service almost for the junior population. We may have agencies that get involved. Sounds a bit like a dream for the candidates, Darren. But you, as of course a very experienced recruiter, what uh, and headhunter in a way, what are the elements that, in your view, are really driving candidates to choose one company rather than another one?
Yeah, I mean, it is important to note, of course, that I've been doing this for 26 years. And right now, these are what I would call the best conditions for my profession that we've ever seen. And will we see anything like it again? Because, things may change in the future. And yeah, the multiple offers, there are just really not enough qualified candidates that are currently based in Luxembourg. And I know we'll touch on recruitments outside of Luxembourg in a little while. But I think that, as Clément mentioned, there has been a change in what people are looking for these days, and especially with more of the, let's say, the junior population. And I remember a conversation with a partner at one of the big four that said he used to have a huge audience of graduates that he would do his prep talk when they first walked in, and there were hundreds of them. And the prep talk would be, if you get your head down, you work hard, and in 14 years you'll make partner. And he said, 10, 15 years ago, you'd still see these hungry eyes thinking, yes, this is exactly where I want to go. And today, when he has those conversations, he has to change it a lot, because the eyes glaze over, and these people are just thinking, in 18 months I'll be running my own business from a coffee shop in Goa. It's changed, and I think the idea of somebody staying long term in roles is also changed. So are we going to get used to the fact that people are going to change more often? So when we see people, and we would want to call them jumpy CVs because they've moved every 2 or 3 years, I think this will be the norm. We won't be able to attract a younger population that have that stability. They just won't exist anymore. And of course, what they are looking for, I think that personal approach, as you mentioned, Clément, making sure that people are meeting the right leaders within the organization that are able to articulate their values and get a personal interpretation of the company from the people within. I think people that are no longer necessarily going on to LinkedIn and just clicking a quick apply. They want to know a little bit more about the company than just the job itself. And of course, the working conditions have changed. COVID has put our lives into a different perspective. I think all of us, not just people that are looking to change roles and develop their careers. I think all of us are now not necessarily putting work in the first priority and looking for other things than just that. So some of those, almost every candidate that approaches our firm are always asking, what are the remote working conditions that the firm is offering? And we see the difference. Josh, you probably see the difference in the US compared to Europe, and Europe, I think, a little bit more open, especially in financial services, to more working from home considerations. And of course, we have the challenges with the frontaliers, but still there needs to be that option.
Many thanks, Darren. What does the financial aspect, what role does the financial aspect play? How much does a company need to pay more in order for someone to move?
Yeah, and this is an interesting times, because I must admit, probably pre-COVID, if somebody approached me and they were only motivated by money and money alone, it's not a good motivator to move. It's not a good motivator to move, because it's highly likely that the firm that they're currently with will offer them that money once they resign. The counter offers. Now we're battling the counter offer with the existing firm and multiple offers. So it's a completely different dynamic. However, there is definitely a shift to money being certainly one of the higher priorities now. And I see firms are doing a number of different things. Some firms are increasing the size of the teams to reduce the workload for people to have a more balance. And then some firms are just paying them more money and not doing that. I believe they need to do both. And that both really probably means, considering the cost of living challenges we have today, we're looking at 10 to 15% just in the roles that you currently have. To move, people are expecting 15 to 20% now, whereas before COVID, the number was more around 5 to 10% increase to move roles. The expectations today are 15 to 20%.
That's an interesting point, Darren, on the financial expectations, and brings us back maybe to the point that it's a candidate-driven market. Joshua, you mentioned during your comment that you expect maybe the market to change a little bit over the next months. What do you have in mind when saying that?
Yeah, I think from what we're seeing from a geopolitical point in the world, and what we're seeing from an M&A perspective in particular, we're seeing deal volume decrease, we're seeing pipeline decrease, and we know that's not just GP Bullhound, that's across many financial services firms. And I'm sure many of you have seen recent articles in the news about big bulge brackets starting to reduce staffing across the world, especially in investment banking, because of those reasons. And I think inflation has an impact as well, cost of living crisis, as Darren has mentioned, in many parts of the world. So this is all having an impact, which creates that perfect storm. And as we've said, conditions have been great since most countries opened up again across the world, and banks have been busy over hiring and many other organizations since then, and lots of people have made the transition into new roles last year, slightly in 2020 you could argue too, but mostly last year. So I think now the banks are inflated and other institutions, so it's time now where we'll see a kind of rebalancing act. So I think Luxembourg will see that too. I think the whole world will see that across many key areas from the US right the way through to Europe and Asia.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua. I'll have to wait and see how the market develops, but of course a lot of very spot on comments. One last point on the recruitment aspect before we move on to the international dimension. Clément, maybe I can ask you the question because it has come up in the Q&A, and although we will address most questions at the end, there was one particularly relevant comment which was made twice, which is to say Luxembourg has been primarily a back and middle office place. Through Brexit, a number of commentators said Luxembourg may also get stronger on the front office side, and Joshua, you mentioned that maybe you have one or the other role, also front role that you are recruiting. Clément, what's your view on the general market trend on this?
I think I do agree that it can happen and it should happen. It's going to be very beneficial for the country, but I think it's going to take a lot of time for this to happen. We've seen also post-Brexit, between the moment Brexit was potentially announced and the moment it took place, the changes we've seen in terms of market locally, of employment market, were not very quick to happen. So I would expect such changes. I would say they would be very beneficial, but to be honest, I don't think we would see them before 2025, 2026.
Great. Many thanks, Clément. I suggest we move on to the second chunk of topics, which is the international dimension. So we spoke about the fact that on a number of positions, in particular regulatory and compliance, it's hard to find people locally, but that's true for other roles as well, in particular IT roles. And sometimes it's necessary to go beyond well, Luxembourg, of course, but even beyond the greater region, beyond Europe. And that is where the immigration topic kicks in. And in order to frame the discussion, I suggest, Laurie, that you give us a quick outline of the issue of immigration topics for Luxembourg before we can speak about what works well and what doesn't.
Thank you, Gilles, and hi, everyone. So as you correctly pointed out, what we see on the Luxembourg market is a need to recruit people that are way further abroad than just the European Union, meaning that employers face a situation where they have to hire what is referred to legally speaking as third country nationals. So a third country national from an immigration law perspective is an individual who has the nationality of a country that is not either a member state of the European Union or not a country that is assimilated to the member states of the European Union. So namely, it's Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, or Switzerland.
Laurie, let me
Yes.
stop you there just for 1 second. You didn't mention the UK.
No, because the UK, since the Brexit, is no longer a member of the European Union, and it is also not listed as an assimilated country. So that's the big news since the Brexit from an immigration law perspective. UK nationals are now considered as third country national and needs to comply with immigration process. And here it's one of the two big points that as an employer you have to keep in mind when you have to recruit people that are third country national, because the 2 points that are at stake is that it's going to add a procedure from the immigration perspective. So third country national will in principle need to obtain immigration documents from Luxembourg authorities to either be able to reside and or work on Luxembourg territory. Now, on the other side, what happens is that it creates also additional obligations for employer. You may say, okay, but why is that so? Because well, it's the third country national who needs to obtain the immigration documents. Well, I would say yes, but in addition to that, there is a big principle within the labor code in Luxembourg that prohibits the occupation of third country nationals who are illegally staying on Luxembourg territory. This actually creates, from a more practical perspective, two main obligations for employers. The first obligation is that employers have to check every time they hire a third country national that the individual, the candidate, is actually holding the required immigration document to work and or reside on Luxembourg territory. And the second main obligation that is linked to it, of course, is that employer needs to keep a copy of that immigration document throughout the entire employment relationship, meaning that you can see there is kind of an obligation for employer to check that third country national always comply with immigration obligations. So here, from that kind of overview of the additional process and obligations that are at stake, I really want to maybe pinpoint one key term that I want you to keep in mind. It's always nationality. As soon as you see that a person has a nationality to fall within the category of third country nationals, you need to be careful and just ask yourself, okay, am I going to need to proceed with these additional obligations that I just mentioned? And is that individual going to need to go through an immigration process to be able to come and work in Luxembourg? Now, there may be some cases where a third country national will not need to obtain immigration documentation to come in Luxembourg, but those cases are exceptions to the rules. It can, for instance, be the case for let's say intragroup services for very specific missions, as long as the third country national who is coming in Luxembourg is not staying for more than 3 months over a 12 months reference period. And here you need to be careful, because you need to know from the beginning that the mission is not going to be to go above. Otherwise, it may be more difficult to then regularize the situation. It will still be possible, but it will not be the clearest situation of all. So that's the second step that you need to keep in your head. First step, check the nationality. Second step, check the setup that you want to implement to see if you fall within an exception or if you need immigration documentation. Know that you're there. The next step, which is the third step, is actually to assess which immigration document is going to be the most relevant for the candidates that you want either to hire or to occupy through a specific employment setup. So in order to do that and really assess what is the most relevant in terms of, the quickness of the process, the duration of the immigration documentation, and so on, you need to take into account several components. So I would say that the first component to take into account is the personal situation of the candidate. Because sometimes, for instance, if you have a candidate that has a specific family situation, you can actually access to processes that are faster than what I would say the usual route. So if, for instance, you have a third country national that you want to hire and you're in a hurry and you realize that that person is actually the official partner or married to an EU citizen, in such case, that person would be eligible to obtain what is referred to as a residence card as a family member of an EU citizen. And such process is actually much faster than the usual route because of one key element. And that element is that the person is going to be able to directly come to Luxembourg territory and file the application while being on Luxembourg territory. The application is actually made at the commune of residence. And once you have given the required documentation to the person at the commune, you're going to receive a proof that you've applied. And based on that proof, the candidate is going to be able to start working as soon as possible. So it's actually making you win a lot of time in terms of the start date of the candidates, because the principle for all other categories is that as long as you have not received the first immigration document, which in most category is the residence authorization that will then become the residence permit. So while you are applying, filing the application, and the application is being processed by the ministry, the candidate needs to stay abroad of Luxembourg, outside of Luxembourg. That's the big principle. So here you can see, the family situation really gives an additional perspective to the possibilities. The second point is the residence place of the candidates, because if the candidate does not want to live in Luxembourg and prefer to reside in one of the cross-bordering countries, in such case, the immigration category are more narrow, if I may say, because then the person will only need to obtain an immigration documentation that enable them to only work on Luxembourg territory and not reside. So it's another process. Finally, but not the least, the additional element that you want to take into account is, of course, the employment situation. So first of all, because you need to see for which specific document you want to apply, because of course, each immigration category, so each immigration document that you aim to have actually requires a different list of documents. So you have a core of documents that is required for pretty much all applications, but for some applications, the list differs. So for instance, if you want to go for a secondment or you want to go for a local contract, you're not going to have the need for the same documents. So that's an important point. The second important point with regard to the employment situation is the job profile and the remuneration. This is especially relevant if you decide to go for a local contract, which is what we see the most in practice. So in that case, you're going to probably hire your candidates under an indefinite employment contract, and you're going to be faced with two choices. Either you want the candidate to apply for residence authorization as an ordinary salaried worker or as a highly qualified employee. In that regard, you have to know that, of course, most popular category, if I may say, is the highly qualified employee category, because first of all, the process usually goes faster, especially because there is no additional requirement to be done. Highly qualified employees are not subject to the market test, meaning that there is no need to obtain, for those of you who know that, the famous ADEME certificate that is actually enabling you to directly hire a third country national, and the obtention of such a document can take up like between 3 to 4 weeks, which is, if you are in a hurry, quite a lot of time. And in addition to that, it's kind of less official, so keep it for yourself. But what we tend to see in practice is that application for highly qualified employees are being treated faster by the ministry in practice. Now, of course, yes.
Sorry, just to jump in on that. The roughly speaking, what's the timing for the ordinary and for the higher ranking, or the highly qualified? Sorry.
So just maybe to enable you to understand in practice what we see and what is legally stated by the law, you have to know that, really strictly legally speaking, the law says that it's the ministry can take up to 4 months to process an application once it has received all the documents. So it's quite long, and it requires a lot of timing for employers who never know when the documents are going to be issued. Now, in practice, what we see in best case scenario, when we actually give very complete files with good quality documents, in the last months, given the backlog that was at stake because of COVID and so on, and the fact that it was the holiday season, I would say for a highly qualified worker employee, maybe 6 weeks, and for ordinary salaried worker, a bit more. So I would say 8, maybe more weeks. So you can see there is a difference here. But there is also the additional 3 to 4 weeks that you have to take into account before even launching the application at the ministry.
Thank you, Lori. So, I mean, a lot of people are commenting on the immigration situation of Luxembourg. Some say it's great, others say it's horrible. So the process, Lori, you have outlined it. It's not so complicated. Clément, what are your feelings around the process and how it has evolved over time? You are confronted with the topic, of course, a lot as well.
So when I first arrived in Luxembourg in recruitment agencies, we were all scared about doing and sponsoring work permits because we were thinking it was very difficult to do so. What I learned here is that it's actually not that big of a deal, and it's manageable. It's not that difficult. It's not a process that is so difficult to manage. And if you don't have the skills internally, you can also go through external providers, and the prices are not that high, I believe. I also believe that recently the government has done huge efforts when it comes to managing the workload they have in terms of additional demands, because there's been way more demands this year than in the previous years for work permit sponsorship. And we've been feeling it in terms of timing, so it's been a bit longer than before. But at the same time, I do believe that it's improving, it's slightly improving, and slowly improving. There are some tricks that can be used here. If you want to shorten the process, for example, asking the candidate to gather the necessary documents right away when you do an offer, warning them that, for example, having a criminal record is going to take a lot of time in some locations. And one other thing is you can recruit in countries that are actually countries where you have third country nationals, like Mauritius. But in some of these countries, like Mauritius, you don't need a visa afterwards. So it can be also faster to get the candidate on board, basically.
Great. Thank you, Clément. Now, beyond the process, of course, comes the question of the personal decision and choice to move to Luxembourg. And that question is more relevant for people coming from far away than coming from France or Germany, of course. Darren, in your experience, what are the elements that Luxembourg as a country can put forward, and you as a recruiter, by the way, can put forward to give people the willingness and motivation to move to Luxembourg?
Yeah, I think the one element to maybe first start with, for those that are in human resources or hiring capacity, that part of that process, please include the accompanying partner in the process when they are looking to relocate. You know, we have this, you know, the phrase happy at home, happy at work, or happy at work, happy at home, because there are so many times that I receive a call from somebody that has relocated to Luxembourg and their partner has a profile that really is very difficult. Even the transferable skills are difficult to find a role in Luxembourg. So we really need to bear that in mind for anybody relocating. But I think there's you know, I've sort of described there are, you know, the senior experienced hires and the more junior profiles, and I think they come for different reasons. And I've always sort of used this analogy of a growing plant, and sometimes when we have to bring the experienced plant that's already grown, it comes with roots, and those roots we have to accommodate, and they can be something like the accompanying partner. They can also be schooling. If the kids are at a certain age, they will need to go to an international school. Is there availability? We can talk about the housing situation and the cost of living in Luxembourg, but I am one that will always challenge whether Luxembourg is expensive or whether we have matured into a destination of choice, and therefore, you know, we are comparable, if not more cost effective than some of the larger cities like Paris and London, especially with the salaries here. And, you know, even if I look at the Mercer, latest Mercer cost of living index across the world's most expensive cities, Luxembourg is 52nd. So I will always challenge anybody that tells me Luxembourg is expensive. I would always say compared to where would be the conversation. So I do think it's a challenge to attract the more experienced profiles because there's other elements, not just the role and just the career opportunities. And that's why I'm always interested in the interns and the graduates arriving. And I know that the service providers, in particular the Big Four, do a fabulous job, I think, and a great service to the Luxembourg economy by bringing such and attracting such juniors over. And of course, as we've discussed, we you know, some stay, some do not stay, which benefits everybody. And I think that it's sometimes easier to attract the more junior profiles because they don't have those roots and they're easier to accommodate. And you know, we are going through that stage where, you know, the price of housing now, we're going to have to go to co-living, and co-living is taking off in Luxembourg. It's something I was used to in London, you know, sharing a house. When I first started out in an office, I was sharing a house with 8 people and 1 bathroom. I believe now they have 2 bathrooms in these co-living workplaces for 8 people. So that's a positive step. And I think that's you know, it's going to be the normal situation for living. The idea that 10 years ago, graduate would come to Luxembourg and rent their own apartment. We've just caught up with other cities. It's no longer necessarily achievable. But the reason people are coming, you know, and I have this image, and that I would love Luxembourg to become, you know, the internship capital of Europe or graduate capital of Europe, because there's so many reasons why somebody, you know, should move and have their internship or start their career in Luxembourg. And you know, to name, you know, a few, of course, it's the geography. You know, we're central in Europe and everywhere is easily accessible. But I think it's also the cosmopolitan nature, you know, of Luxembourg. You know, this is, remember, I've worked in London, so I know what a cosmopolitan city is. But having 70% you know, foreigners living in the capital city is quite impressive. Having, you know, the 170 plus nationalities that are here. I think that is a real draw. I think the fact that Luxembourg is a safe city. I think this is a, you know, it's definitely a benefit for everybody, but in particular, I think the female workforce that want to come to Luxembourg, it's safe. And not only is it safe for females, it's also one of the smallest gender pay gaps in Europe. So there's a lot of good reasons why women should be attracted to come to come to Luxembourg. Also, I think the introduction for free childcare from the age of 4 to 12 is really, I think this could be a real game changer, where we don't lose people for too long or actually lose them out of the workforce. So people coming over and recognizing we've got childcare if you're living in Luxembourg, and also free lunches for children. That's one of my favorites, as well as the free public transport. I recently just come back from a visit to London, and you forget how clean and green Luxembourg is. It really is. But I could go on forever about the reasons why people should come to Luxembourg, and there are many opportunities, as I think, as we've highlighted before. Of course, it's a back and middle office country, but I think Brexit is now providing some opportunities to have some more front office roles here. So I think the career opportunities are only going to get more and more interesting here.
Thank you, Darren. So I suggest that also in the interest of time, we are moving to the last chunk of discussion points, which is the topic around what benefits typically private capital players are offering. And maybe as a word of introduction on that part, let me just tell you that from a legal perspective, it's pretty easy. The law only requires to pay salary and to grant holidays. We have 26 days of annual leave and 11 days of public holidays per year. Beyond that, everything is voluntary, that is granted by a company. What you have to know in particular, if you're not used to European social security systems, so Luxembourg has a mandatory social security system. It contains pension, it contains salary continuation, it contains benefits when you and service when you are sick. It contains dependency when you are elder and need care, and it contains a part of accident insurance at the workplace. And that element is mandatory for every employee that is hired in Luxembourg. There are no two different parallel systems, one private, one public. There is only this public system. Most elements are covered. So if you are going to a dentist, for instance, it will be paid for by Social Security, unless certain services that are considered as going beyond what is strictly required. And for that, you can have an additional private insurance that you conclude yourself or that your company pays for, and the same is valid for pension. So there's a mandatory system, which, and I think in international comparison, Darren, is considered as a very generous system. But if you want more, there can be a private pension insurance that comes on top of it. But before we are discussing what private capital players are typically offering, and Joshua, I would also be interested in hearing what your company has. Just pointing at one question that came from the audience before, but which fits in very well here, which is relocation services. We spoke about immigration, we spoke about people coming from far away. Clément, Darren, what are your experiences that that affect this element of relocation? Do companies typically pay part of it, or don't they?
I can start maybe here. We do. I believe that companies should sponsor it. So I would do it from my end. And I believe that it can be a difference maker for the candidate that is making such a hard choice of relocating from another country with a whole family. Having the ability to be supported in that from the company is going to create a real link with the future employer. So I believe that it's a difference maker, and I believe it's necessary. I don't even think that it's feasible for companies today to refuse this to candidates. That's at least my opinion. Though you also have some companies that go through external provider help for this, to go a bit more in depth for very senior profiles, so senior managers, directors, partners, etc. Why not? On this, I was a bit disappointed by the services that were provided, to be honest, on the market. I haven't found like the perfect fit on this specifically so far.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree, not necessarily on the provision of services. I think there's some good relocation firms out there, but I think in particular, I think firms are utilizing the relocation firms if they're not doing it themselves, and offering not only accommodation for a period of up to 2 months typically, but also, transport and maybe some of their, the goods and belongings to bring to Luxembourg as well. That's what we're typically seeing. And as Clement mentioned, if they're not currently doing that, then the trend is picking up again, because there was a point in time a few years ago where it was really common, and then it sort of stopped, and now it's if you're not offering it now, you need to go back and think about what we can offer people coming to Luxembourg.
And
Great.
Darren, if I may comment on what you just said earlier, you spoke about the higher profile who comes with the roots, but even for more junior profile, just to help them set in the roots, to accompany them in the first months. I mean, immigration process can seem overwhelming, and the fact of finding accommodation here in Luxembourg, coming from far away, not knowing the country, just to feel accompanied in that process, it's a long way to go, I think, in the difference.
I think you're right. And sometimes when we think about, third nationals, we sometimes picture the US or the UK, where, people may have savings. But if we're coming from Asia, typically the types of rent and guarantees that people have to be concerned about, it can be a real strain. So if we can, if companies can alleviate those first few months, of course, it makes life much easier.
Great. So we conclude that relocation services are still very important and helpful. Now, when people are recruited and then start their work, so I mentioned we have a mandatory social security system, which is by international standards a very good one. We have salary, we have holidays. Joshua, what other things have you thought about when you set up your activities here in Luxembourg last year?
Yeah, good question. And I know a lot of firms have similar benefits, some better than others, of course. But I think from when I look at ours, I think what's unique is we offer a language license to a platform called Boozhoo, which we have up to 80 licenses, where I think for Luxembourg is great. If people who join us want to learn a new language or brush up on a language, and that's just super helpful. So people don't have to think about that. And we actually have an example of someone who joined us recently from Eastern Europe and needed to brush up on English and is also learning French. So that's available to them as well. We also have additional holiday allowance in Luxembourg to try and remain competitive away from our standard approach to that. And as we're a global firm, we want people that are based in Luxembourg to feel that they're part of a global firm. So we have regular company global calls. We even have a ski trip to Austria once a year, where all of our Luxembourg employees get to meet their colleagues from the US and rest of Europe and Asia, which is quite unique. I've only heard of a couple of other firms which potentially do that in Luxembourg, or these kind of company strategy sessions outside. So on top of that, I think secondments is something we aim to offer all staff. So once you've done at least 12 months within GP Bullhound, you can then start to look at secondments to other locations, which again broadens experience and development. And I think on top of that, it's that retention piece, which I think Darren touched on as well. So we think really carefully in Luxembourg how we onboard and what that kind of initial orientation looks like. We make sure our Luxembourg employees have a mentor outside of Luxembourg. So again, great for training and development and just expanding horizons. And then from a wellness perspective, something we take very seriously is having a benefit that helps with that. So there's a cash benefit of up to 1,300 euros roughly annually, where our Luxembourg employees can spend on a gym or yoga or whatever it may be to kind of help with well-being, stress management, etc. So I think those benefits are maybe more slightly unique to what we offer.
Thank you, Joshua. I can confirm that a well-being allowance is something that you see, but not so often. So, so an interesting concept. But speaking about well-being, we have, of course, the element of holidays. So, Laurie, maybe you want to say 2 words on that. The Luxembourg standard is 26 days, which in international comparison can be seen as relatively high. Do people go beyond that?
Yes, especially in the financial sector, because, well, financial institution may be kind of in competition with banks who are subject to the obligations that are foreseen by the collective bargaining agreement applicable for banking employees. And well, it's not a secret on Luxembourg markets. Everybody says that banking employees have a lot of holidays. Roughly speaking, I think you're at around 34.5 days of holidays, taking the annual leave and the rest days leave. So other financial institutions have to keep up with that. And so what we see is that you have a top up that is usually applicable. So it can go around 28 to 30 days of holidays. And if you speak, you know, just in terms of week, without taking the weekend, you are at 6 weeks of holiday per year, which is quite a lot.
Thank you, Laurie. An interesting part on that, and a comment, I don't want to be quoted on that, is of course that was an easy concession to make in the past. People said instead of having 25 or 26 days, you have 30 days, and then the unwritten rule was that it was very unwell perceived if you actually took all your holidays. So it was a nice gesture towards the outside world, but times have changed, and now a lot of people are taking all their holidays, of course, which has always been a legal right, of course. Beyond holidays, what about pension, medical insurance? Darren, is that something that people are interested in?
I think once people understand that if they're looking for medical insurance in Luxembourg, I highlight to them that the sort of that there isn't really a let's say a professional a payment you can make extra. It's more of a European-wide medical insurance that you can offer, but it's not necessarily that relevant in Luxembourg. And let's face it, it's a very, very high quality level of medical care that we have here. And on the pensions, it's only applicable really for the more senior candidates that are asking. The more junior candidates are still not thinking so far ahead on the pension. But of course, when we do highlight the as you have earlier, those social contributions for the Luxembourgish pension is also incredibly favourable compared to other countries. But I think the probably the most common request at the moment is that it is around holidays, and it's also around working from home. What type of flexibility? There's the other is working from anywhere, and of course we have some obligations not only on a regulatory standpoint, but also for substance purposes, but also for those that are working already on the frontaliers and not living in Luxembourg. But these are the questions we're always getting asked: is what are the flexibility arrangements for working? I can't see that stopping, because I even came across somebody the other day is are there any opportunities where somebody can work for a month and then work from anywhere for a month? And that was the first time I've been asked that question. But I think we're going to get more and more demands for flexibility. So those companies, that it's one of the questions, of course, when somebody approaches us about looking for staff for them, it's the first question we're asking now: what are your working from home or working from anywhere arrangements? And when they say we don't have them, expect everybody to be in the office 5 days, then it's a case of educating that's going to be tough these days.
So thank you, Darren, for the international audience. just 2 words of explanation around the tax and social security points. So in Luxembourg has the specific situation that we have an enormous fraction of cross-border commuters that come to Luxembourg every day. And if they do work remotely from their home, there can be negative tax and social security consequences if a certain threshold of days is exceeded. For tax, the threshold is relatively low. For social security, it's higher, 25% of the overall yearly working time. But if you put that aside, which is a challenge specific to Luxembourg, if you put that aside, Darren, what is your, and Clément, what are your what is the feedback that you get from the market in terms of the number of days that most companies allow people to work remotely?
I would say it would be between 1 to 2 days a week would be the average that I see here. And one thing we did not discuss so much about here, but it's I think one big trend is going to be satellite offices as well for the major employers. So giving the ability to employees that live at the border to work in an office that is near to their house, but still located in Luxembourg, this way avoiding the tax issues you just mentioned, basically.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, most people are looking for the 3-2, but of course, if they're frontaliers, they fall into the challenges of taxation rules.
Yeah,
and I believe that Luxembourg may have to reinvent a bit here the approach, or may have to be a bit creative here, because I believe that indeed what's going to make the difference in the future in terms of benefits is going to be flexibility related. And on this, we clearly have limitations on the location from where you can do home working, basically. So it's clearly something to investigate here.
This fits in well towards a question that has been raised by one of our attendees, namely, do we see companies having people work from home from their country of residence, which is then by assumption not Luxembourg, but one of the 3 neighboring countries. So 2 days from their, or 3 days from their home country, and then the rest in Luxembourg present. And the answer is no, because you would, under such a model, go beyond the social security limit, which is at 25%. And that would entail that the Luxembourg employer becomes liable for social security contributions in the other country, which has it's not an impossible task, but it has a number of very adverse effects for Luxembourg company, and most Luxembourg employers would want to avoid that at all costs. So you can see companies that open up remote working for cross-border workers, but usually to such an extent that it stays below the 25% limit, so that people are not working more than 25% from their home country. But another interesting question from the audience is, how about cars and transportation? And maybe as an introductory comment on that, and maybe not everyone knows it, Luxembourg has free public transport. So the tram, the bus, they are for free. But beyond that, cars and trains that are paid, is that something that we see in the market? Maybe Darren.
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, especially moving from one company to the other company, if they already have a car, and if they've worked in Luxembourg for some time, they usually do. Whether this is going to change with some of the benefit in kind taxes, creeping up, are people going to be more inclined to use public transport? At the moment, it's still relatively favorable to have a company car, unlike other countries. I mean, in the UK, the company cars disappeared almost overnight when the benefit in kind taxation was made it incredibly unfavorable to have a company car. But here it's still relatively favorable. I think there's still people that would prefer to drive. People still want their parking space. Which is unfortunate, but again, we are seeing an increase in people using public transport. I think once the tram is extended to the airport and beyond, and doing the loop around Cloche d'Or, then I think we will probably see more and more people wish to use the free transport.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now let's maybe have a look at the salary itself. You may know, or you may not know, that Luxembourg is one of the few countries in the world that still has a mandatory indexation system, which in essence works in a way that if inflation on a number of items, including rent, petrol, bread, and other items, increases by 2.5%, all Luxembourg salaries, irrespective of the seniority of the person and the level of remuneration of the person, so from the lowest earner to the highest earner of a company, everyone gets 2.5% more. Joshua, I assume that when you started your operations here, you must have been a bit surprised about that system. Have you not?
Yes, completely. And we're still learning is the ultimate answer there. So we rely on our conducting officers in Luxembourg to kind of help, who basically really assisted us locally and setting up when it comes to local procedures, policies. So even though I'm in a different location geographically, we rely locally on the expertise we have on the ground. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
And another question that came in from the audience is around bonuses. So what are the typical bonus systems that you see in the private capital sector? Maybe Joshua, you want to go first, and then we can widen the discussion. Discretionary, target bonus, fixed bonus.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination depending on level. When I think of kind of analyst, associate, maybe slightly higher, there's not so much an appetite for chunky sign-on bonuses, for example, or guarantees, and candidates, we don't have to consider that deferred or that equity or stock they have, and then we have to think about how we're going to get around that and kind of make people whole. So from what I've seen, and it's still only the first year we've really started to go through a remuneration process with our employees, but I think in terms of what bonuses are doing with us, it's competitive. It's probably kind of median. There's definitely some institutions paying a lot more, and then there's some slightly less. I think from our experience with trying to hire, we've seen some big numbers in terms of what candidates are expecting, and if they're moving during the year, what does that look like year end, and do we have to do some sort of special situation, or can a verbal whisper in some cases be enough to kind of entice these people and over to come work for us? And I'm sure the others on the panel will say that's not enough sometimes, especially in some of these harder to fill positions. You do really have to roll out a lot to be able to get the deed done. So yeah, it's definitely a combination to answer your question.
Thank you, Joshua. Just another point on the bonus, which was a question from the audience, namely, is there a bonus cap in Luxembourg? And the question relates to the regulatory framework. For unregulated structures, there is no bonus cap. So the bonus can be whatever percentage of the fixed remuneration. For regulated activities under the umbrella of an AIFM, an alternative investment fund manager, there can be a bonus cap depending on what degree of regulation applies to such AIFM. But nevertheless, in comparison to companies that are under more stringent rules, in particular banks and certain investment firms and certain insurance companies, the regulatory layer that applies to AIFMs is a bit lower. And if the size of the AIFM is not too big in terms of assets under management and in terms of other elements that are relevant, well then the limit on bonus payments and how they are structured are not so important. Any experience on bonuses from your side, Clément?
Yeah, so I see that it's more and more common to kind of compensate the loss of a bonus for a candidate mid-year when they come in. So this is a trend that I've seen also in the last 2-3 years more and more. And the second thing is from an employer perspective, we see many companies splitting the bonus or giving bonuses in 2 different time frames during the year. So that basically people have to wait until the bonus a bit more than usual. These would be for me the 2 main trends that I've witnessed recently.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. I mean, the sign-on bonus is mainly to cover the bonus that would be paid at certain times of the year. But typically, we're seeing about 2 months of salary for bonus on generally across the board.
That's an interesting fact. Thank you, Darren.
Yeah, and maybe to jump in on the sign-on bonus, as you mentioned earlier, Gilles, there are some entities that are regulated and that are subject to certain caps with regard to bonus. And, you know, you can have just strict performance bonus and additional bonus such as the sign-on bonus. But at the end of the day, these are all variable remuneration. And so in terms of the calculation of the bonus cap, sometimes it can be taken into account. So employers are sometimes restricted in that regard.
Indeed, thank you, Laurie. Another question from the audience is whether there are schemes available in Luxembourg to remove or reduce income tax on bonus. So we had in the past a system which was called the system of the warrants, which allowed through a relatively strange structuring of bonuses by investing into future derivatives to reduce the bonus, the effective tax burden of bonuses quite substantially. But this system has been effectively abandoned by the Luxembourg tax administration, and today we have a system of what is called prime participative, but which is in relative terms not so attractive and doesn't lead to many people being covered. Any experiences or comments on that from one of you guys? No. So I think the lack of reaction means that it is a system which is so limited in terms of its attractiveness that it's not worth going into details in the framework of this discussion, I believe. And a last point where tax structuring can be interesting is around people that come to Luxembourg for a limited number of time, where you can use what is called the impatriation regime, where a certain number of items, in particular regarding the accommodation and the cost of living allowance, can receive a preferential tax treatment. But that is not available for the entire company and not in all circumstances. So that would have to be verified on a case-by-case basis. Another discussion is around third country nationals, the hiring. Can the colleagues already be present in Luxembourg for 3 months while waiting for the documents, Laurie, or do they have to come back to their country?
Well, the principle is really to stay outside of Luxembourg territory while waiting for the application to be processed. No, people could say, well, I could come in Luxembourg as a tourist and say for 3 months and it's fine. But I think that's in order to be as transparent and compliant with the ministry, the best approach is to remain outside of Luxembourg territory, because you want to avoid any situation where the ministry would ask a question, well, what is the person doing on the Luxembourg territory, and is the person actually starting to work? You want to avoid these suspicions, because in case the demand was made and the person was already on Luxembourg territory, the answer from the ministry is very clear. The request would be inadmissible.
I would say maybe the last question for our today's session, in order for us to comply with the timing, is a very interesting one around retention. I think we spoke a little bit about it, about the remote working, about the work-life balance. Are there other elements where we can see that values more generally, corporate culture, are becoming increasingly important, and how does that play out in the private capital work? Maybe Joshua, you can go first, and then Clément and Darren, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think from what I've seen is, yeah, corporate social responsibility, ESG principles. They're a hot topic, and I think candidates are extremely interested in how a firm positions themselves in that context. And I think also it's also important that from a diversity and an inclusion perspective, and that's a big topic in itself, and we could spend all day on that. But I think it's really showing candidates what we do on that aspect, whether it's through returnship schemes or really kind of taking a stance when we're hiring to kind of have equal slates. I think it's important, and you can really see that through branding material that companies produce. And we certainly here we have a candidate brochure which talks about what we do from a CSR perspective, what we do from an ESG perspective, why that's important to us, and kind of highlighting our values, which kind of overarch that. So yeah, I think it's vitally important, and a lot of I would say it's important at all levels, but definitely when you speak to graduates or students, that's a question they ask at campus events. So if you can really get that across, I think you're kind of on to a good start.
Thank you, Joshua. Clément?
I would see retention as being the highest item on the agenda of a recruiter today in Luxembourg. It should be the number one priority and concern. We've seen the levels of retention drastically change post-COVID. I do believe that most people would change just to go out of the financial sector and to move out from the private equity jobs. So there's also a trend that these jobs are getting less and less interesting, or the job content for some persons actually, or the persons that are actually professionals at the moment in this field. No, for sure, transpiring some values, proving them through specific action is going to make a strong difference for the new generation, so for the junior populations.
And maybe from a legal advisor perspective, what we also see on the market is an increasing demand from employers to organize workshop with regard to diversity, inclusion, workplace culture. I think it's really a trend, and it's becoming more and more important.
Yeah, for me, we're always getting asked, and of course and we're always asking what the style of leadership is in firms, and I think, post-COVID, people are looking for a different style of leadership, and I think, when I come across some, I'll call it old school, those people in leadership positions that are close to retirement, they're the firms that have a challenge, because if their style of leadership doesn't change to become more empathetic, leading from the heart, these things that we've all been missing for many years, and it's come about during COVID. These are the sort of leaders we want to work with. If they don't change, then they're going to have a challenge retaining staff. So it's more important today than to recognize what is the style of the leaders in the organization that I want to be a part of. People are asking more and more about that.
Maybe one last thing here to link this topic to the benefits topic we were speaking about a bit earlier. I've heard this week about counter offer that happened for one candidate we made an offer to. And the company we had in front of us actually offered 1 month of holiday to the candidate to stay in the company. So we are seeing companies being very creative in the way they approach retention.
So Clément, you are giving ourselves and the audience good ideas to have a talk with their own employers. Yeah. So many thanks. I think there are maybe 2 questions that are still outstanding, and I'm going to respond to them in maybe 1 word. Does part-time work fall into the 25% rule from a social security perspective? The answer is yes. another question, is it possible to find a job if I come from Mexico? The answer is yes, of course. Mexico has no other, no better and no worse preconditions than all other third countries that we can think of. And actually, Evie, you answered one question, which was about what is the best way to get recruited in Luxembourg. And I think the obvious answer is to come to the job fair on the 25th of October. And maybe that is a good conclusion for our discussion today. Many thanks for all the panelists for the great insights, very proactive responses, clear responses. Many thanks to the audience as well to have been so numerous with us until the end. And I guess back to you, Evie, for the last words.
Thank you, Gilles. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful discussion. Very informative. It will remain available on our YouTube channel if you would like to share with your network. And of course, as Gilles said, the best way to find a job in Luxembourg is to join our job fair. There is also another job fair, Movie Job. There are numerous sites that you can apply, LinkedIn. Many recruiters use LinkedIn nowadays. So thank you for everything, for this nice discussion, and see you all in another event or webinar of the LPA.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.